My family abandoned me at my 18th birthday dinner alone at a restaurant, but when my grandfather discovered my mother lied about being sick, he changed his will and cut them out of $800K inheritance. Now they're begging me to forgive them, but it's too late. I'm 18 years old, just started college, and I need to tell this story because what happened to me a few months ago still hurts when I think about it. Like, I physically feel something in my chest when I remember that night. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand why all of this was so devastating. Although honestly, I don't know if I'll ever fully understand how my own parents could do this to me. I grew up being basically invisible in my own house. I have an older sister, Rachel, who's 21 now. And for as long as I can remember, she's been my parents' favorite. And when I say favorite, I don't mean they gave her a little more attention. No. I mean it was literally like I didn't exist most of the time. Rachel would get good grades and my parents would take her out to celebrate, buy cake, invite the family over. I'd get the same grades or better, and my mom, Linda, would say something like, "Oh, that's nice, honey," and keep watching TV. You know what I mean? It wasn't that. They actively treated me badly all the time. It was more that I just wasn't on their radar, like I was just another piece of furniture in the house. My dad, Christopher, works in finance or something like that. Honestly, I never paid much attention because he didn't pay attention to anything I did either. He's like 51 years old, and he was always one of those dads who comes home late, has dinner, and goes to his office. But with Rachel, it was different. With her, he'd stay talking in the living room, ask her about her day. They'd go to the movies together on Saturdays. He never invited me once. My mom is 48, and she's a homemaker, which made everything worse because she was there all day, and I still didn't exist to her. She'd spend hours helping Rachel with her college projects, taking her shopping, planning things together, not with me. The only person in my family who really saw me was my grandfather, my mom's dad. He was always different. You know, he'd ask me how I was doing, remember, things I liked, send me random texts to check on me. I think he noticed how my parents treated me, but he'd never said anything directly, at least not that I knew of. He's like 75 years old, and he's one of those people who still has a lot of energy, always moving around, doing things. He loves me a lot. I always knew that. So, we get to my 18th birthday. This was in March, I think, or maybe late February. I'm not exactly sure, but it was still cold outside. I was excited because, turning 18 is important, right? It's like officially being an adult and all that. I decided to plan something simple. Nothing over the top, because I already knew that if I waited for my parents to organize something, I'd end up disappointed, like always. So I booked a table at an Italian restaurant I liked. Nothing fancy but not cheap either, like one of those places where the pasta is good and the atmosphere is nice. I invited my family, my grandfather, and my two best friends. 8 people total, including Rachel. I gave them 2 weeks' notice, sent them the address, the time, everything. On the night of my birthday, I got dressed up, put on a dress I'd bought with my own money from my part-time job at a clothing store. Did my makeup? I was genuinely happy. I got to the restaurant like 15 minutes early because I wanted to make sure everything was okay, confirm the reservation and stuff. The waitress took me to the table, a big table I'd specifically requested for 8 people. And I sat down to wait. And I waited, and kept waiting. 15 minutes went by, and nobody showed up. I texted my friends, and they responded super quickly, saying they were on their way. There was traffic. Okay, normal. But my family didn't answer. I messaged the family chat we had. Nothing. I sent a direct message to my mom. Nothing. To my dad. Nothing. To Rachel. Nothing. Another 15 minutes passed. The waitress kept coming over to ask if I wanted to order something while I waited, and I'd tell her no, that they were about to arrive. But inside, I was starting to feel that horrible feeling in my stomach. You know, when you know something's wrong but you don't want to admit it yet. After half an hour sitting there alone, my phone finally rang. It was Rachel. I answered like super fast, and the first thing I said was, "Where are you guys? Are you okay?" And she, in the most casual voice in the world, tells me, "Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you. Mom wasn't feeling well, so we canceled." We canceled. Just like that. Like she was talking about the weather. I was literally speechless for a second, and then I asked her, "What do you mean you canceled? It's my birthday. Why didn't you tell me?" And Rachel just said, "Oops, sorry. It's just that everything happened so fast and we forgot to call you. But you know how mom gets when she's not feeling well. And she hung up. Hung up without even wishing me happy birthday. I sat there at that huge table for 8 people. Alone. Trying not to cry because there were people around and I didn't want to make a scene. The waitress came over again and I think she realized something was wrong because she asked me very softly if everything was okay. I told her yes, that there'd been a change of plans, and I got up to leave. I walked out of the restaurant and just stood there on the street, not knowing what to do. I called my best friend, Karen, and told her what had happened. She got furious. Told me she was coming right away and not to move. But then something happened that I didn't expect. My grandfather showed up. He arrived in his old car, a Toyota Camry from like 2010 or something, and parked right in front of the restaurant. He got out and when he saw me standing there, obviously about to cry, his face completely changed. He asked me what had happened and I told him everything. I watched him turn red with anger. Like literally his face turned red. And he said, "Let's go inside and celebrate your birthday properly." We went in together, sat down, ordered food, and he tried so hard to make me feel better. He made me laugh, telling stories from when he was young, asked me about school, about my plans for college, gave me an envelope with money, like $200 if I remember correctly. It was the only gift I received that day from my family. Karen arrived like 20 minutes later with my other friend, Jess, and the 4 of us had dinner. My friends were outraged. They kept asking me how it was possible that my family had done that to me, and I honestly didn't have answers. My grandfather paid the entire bill without letting me contribute a single cent, hugged me tight when we said goodbye, and told me he would always be there for me. I didn't know it at the time, but that night changed a lot of things. It turns out after dropping me off, my grandfather went straight to my house. I went with Karen to her apartment because I didn't want to go home yet. I needed to process everything. My grandfather told me later what happened. He arrived and found my mom perfectly fine, watching TV in the living room with my dad. She wasn't sick. There was nothing wrong with her. When he asked them why they hadn't gone to my birthday dinner, my mom told him something like, "Oh, Dad, I had a bit of a headache and didn't feel like going out. A bit of a headache. That's why they didn't go to their daughter's birthday dinner." My grandfather exploded. He told me he'd never yelled like that in his life, that he told them everything. How was it possible they treated their granddaughter that way? That they were terrible parents, that they should be ashamed. My mom started crying and saying he didn't understand, that it had been a misunderstanding, pure excuses. Then my grandfather dropped something neither they nor I expected. He told them he was going to change his will. My grandfather has quite a bit of money. He's not a millionaire, but he has a good amount saved from his construction business he had for years, plus his house and other properties. He'd always said he was going to leave everything to my mom when he died, but that night he told them not anymore, that he was going to divide everything between Rachel and me directly, and that my mom wasn't going to see a single cent if she kept treating me the way she did. My mom went hysterical. She started screaming, how dare he, that she was his daughter, that he couldn't do that to her. My dad tried to calm him down too, but my grandfather told them his decision was made, and he was going to call his lawyer in the morning. He left the house slamming the door. He told me all this later over the phone while I was at Karen's house, still trying to understand what had happened with my birthday. What came next was even worse. The next day was Rachel's birthday. No, I'm not kidding. Her birthday is literally 1 day after mine. And guess what happened? My mom woke up feeling perfectly fine, ready to celebrate. They organized a special breakfast. Over the house, balloons, a huge cake. My parents gave her expensive gifts, like a new laptop, clothes, jewelry. They took her to dinner that night at a restaurant much nicer than the one I'd chosen. The whole family went. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. They didn't even tell me they were doing anything. I found out because Rachel posted photos on Instagram. I went back home that morning because I needed to pick up some things for school. When I walked in and saw all the decorations, all the stuff for Rachel, something inside me broke. My mom was in the kitchen preparing I don't know what, and when she saw me, she said, "Oh, you're here," in the coldest tone you can imagine. She didn't ask me how the night before had gone, didn't ask if I was okay, nothing. I asked her why they hadn't gone to my dinner, and she told me she'd already explained to my grandfather that she hadn't felt well. I told her my grandfather told me she was perfectly fine when he got there. She got defensive. and told me she didn't have to give me explanations, that she was my mother and that was that. I went to my room and started crying. I couldn't take it anymore. You know, it was too much. I packed a backpack with clothes and things I was going to need and decided to stay with Karen for a while. I went downstairs and my mom saw me with the backpack and asked me where I was going. I told her I was going to stay with a friend for a few days. She shrugged and said whatever. But call me when your dad gets back from work so you can help me with something. She didn't call me. I was away from home for 3 days, and neither of my parents sent me a message, called me, nothing. Rachel didn't either. It was like I didn't exist. Again. The 4th day after my birthday, I went back home because I needed more clothes and to pick up some books. When I got there, the house was empty, or at least I thought it was. Turns out my mom was in her room. I left my backpack at the entrance and went to the kitchen to get water. There were dirty dishes in the sink, not many, but some. I drank my water and was about to leave when my mom came downstairs and saw me. The first thing she said to me was, why hadn't I washed the dishes? I told her I'd just arrived, that I didn't even know whose dishes those were. She told me she didn't care, that I lived in that house and had to contribute. I said, okay, I'll wash them later. Let me go upstairs to get my things. But she followed me upstairs and started yelling at me, that I was ungrateful, that they gave me a roof and food, and I couldn't even wash some dishes, that I'd always been problematic, that Rachel never gave her these headaches. I stood there listening to her yell and something in me exploded too. I yelled back at her for the first time in my life. I told her she'd never treated me like a daughter, that it was obvious she didn't care about me, that Rachel was her only daughter, and I was just a burden. I told her she'd ruined my birthday and hadn't even had the decency to apologize. My mom went livid. She started yelling at me even louder, told me I was being dramatic, that I was exaggerating, that if I didn't like how they treated me, I could leave their house. I told her, perfect. I'm leaving. I went to my room, started shoving clothes into my backpack, everything I could carry. My mom kept yelling at me from the doorway. My dad arrived in the middle of all this, came upstairs to see what was happening, and instead of trying to calm the situation or ask what was going on, he looked at me and told me that if I was going to disrespect my mother, then yes, it was better if I left. I left that house crying, with my backpack half closed, tripping on the stairs because I couldn't see well through the tears. I couldn't even pick up everything I needed. I called my grandfather from outside the house, sitting on the curb, and told him everything. He was furious again, told me to stay where I was, that he was going to come pick me up and we were going to go back to the house together to get my things. I told him I didn't want to go back, but he insisted, said he wasn't going to let my parents get away with it. My grandfather arrived in like 45 minutes. He lived on the other side of town. We went back to the house together and he knocked on the door. My mom opened it, and when she saw him, her face changed. He told her he was coming to help me pick up my things and there wasn't going to be any problem, right, Linda? My mom stepped aside without saying anything. We went up to my room, and that's when I saw what they'd done. My room was practically empty. My clothes, most of them, weren't there. My books, my school notebooks, my personal things, photos, everything was gone. My bed was still there. My desk, too. But everything else was gone. I ran downstairs and asked my mom where my things were. She was sitting in the living room with my dad, and when I asked her, they both laughed. They laughed in my face. My dad told me that, since I'd decided to leave, they'd donated my things to a charity organization. Donated. All my clothes, my books, my memories, everything. I started yelling at them. Asked them how they could do that. That those were my things. That they had no right. My mom told me that as long as I lived under their roof, everything in that house was technically theirs. And besides, I didn't live there anymore, so it didn't matter. They kept laughing, like it was the funniest thing in the world. My grandfather looked at them with an expression I'd never seen on him, like really scared, and told them they were despicable people. How could they do that to their own daughter? My dad told him not to get involved, that this was between us. My grandfather gently grabbed my arm and told me, let's go. We went up to my room again, picked up the few things that were left, some things from my desk, and my laptop that thank God they hadn't touched because I had it hidden under the mattress. Some shoes. We left that house and I knew I was never going back. My grandfather took me to his house that night. He made me dinner, let me cry as much as I needed, didn't pressure me to talk. The next day, he woke me up and told me we were going shopping. I told him I didn't have money to buy new clothes, that I barely had like $300 saved from my job. He told me not to worry, that he was going to help me. We went to Target, to Old Navy, to several stores, and he bought me clothes, school supplies for college, where I was going to start in a few months, hygiene products, everything I needed. He easily spent like $800 that day, maybe more. Karen called me that afternoon, and when I told her what had happened, she started crying with me over the phone. She told me I could stay at her place as long as I needed, that her parents were okay with it, and that I could also use her clothes, her books, whatever. Jess also offered to help, gave me a bunch of clothes she didn't wear anymore but were in perfect condition. My grandfather told me I could stay with him too, that he had an extra room that was mine if I needed it. A few months passed after all this. I stayed mainly at Karen's house because it was closer to my school, but I visited my grandfather every week. My parents never contacted me. Not once. Rachel sent me a message like 2 weeks later, saying she hoped I was okay, but when I responded, explaining how I felt, she left me on read and never wrote to me again. My grandfather kept his promise and changed his will. He told me one day when we were having dinner together. He explained that he'd divided everything between Rachel and me, 50/50, and that my mom wasn't going to receive anything directly. He also told me that if I ever needed help with college, with a car, with whatever, I just had to ask him. I cried right there in the restaurant, thanked him like 1,000 times. Now I'm in college, studying psychology because after all this, I realized I want to understand why people do what they do, why parents can be so cruel to their own children. I live on campus, have a part-time job at the university bookstore, and honestly, I'm doing okay. Does it still hurt? Yeah, obviously. There are days when I see other students talking about their families, about how their parents visited them or sent them care packages with food, and I feel that pang in my chest again. But I also learned who really loves me and who is just there out of obligation. My grandfather visited me at college last month. He took me to dinner, asked me how my classes were going, gave me more money than I needed for books. He told me he was proud of me, that I was a strong girl, and I was going to achieve everything I set my mind to. When he left that night, I realized he's all the family I really need. Him and my friends who were there when my own parents turned their backs on me. Last week, Karen asked me if I would ever forgive my parents. I told her I didn't know, that maybe someday, but that, right now, I don't even want to think about it. And it's the truth. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive what they did to me, especially about my birthday. Every time I see a birthday date on the calendar, I remember that night. Sitting alone in that restaurant, waiting for a family that never came. And then I remember my grandfather showing up, being the only one who came through, and that makes everything hurt a little less. I guess at the end of the day, that's enough for now.